The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Tonight we present a debate between the two candidates who are running for assembly in the Democratic primary for the 81st Assembly District. It's a district that includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Kingsbridge, Kingsbridge Heights, Marble Hill, Norwood, Riverdale, Wakefield, Woodlawn, and Van Cortlandt Village. Tonight's program is presented in conjunction with the League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political organization that advocates for informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and also by City Limits, the Bronx Times, and the Norwood News. The Democratic primary is scheduled for June 28th. All eligible voters are urged to vote. Last day to apply in person for an absentee ballot is June 27th. Last day to postmark primary election ballots is June 28th. And the primary election ballots must be received by the county board no later than July 5th. The early voting period is now until June 26th. For more information on any of that, you could visit vote.nyc. Now let's meet the candidates. The incumbent is Jeffrey Dinowitz. He has represented this district since his election in 1994. He's a graduate of Brooklyn Law School, and prior to his election to the Assembly, he served as an administrative law judge for the state of New York. He's also right now the chair of the Assembly's Committee on Codes. Challenger is Jessica Altagracia-Wolford, a mom, a wife, a caregiver, and an organizer. Ms. Altagracia-Wolford has worked in local and national Democratic politics and government for nearly a decade, including the de Blasio administration, New York Immigration Coalition, and U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand's office. Candidates in tonight's debate, I will direct the question to one candidate. That candidate will respond, and then the other candidate will get 90 seconds to respond to the question before we proceed to the next question. Each response will be 90 seconds. Candidates will receive 30 and 15-second verbal time warnings. I, as the moderator, reserve the right to ask follow-up questions and also to allow for rebuttals and dialogue. Please note that after the initial answers, no statement can be longer than 30 seconds, and we ask that candidates be respectful, not talk over each other, especially in this virtual setting. Just raise your hand and I will recognize you. And please note, no opening statements, but at the end of the program, each candidate will have 1 minute to offer a concluding comment. One final note before we begin: the questions on tonight's program include those submitted by the candidates themselves. So by prior agreement, the first question goes to you, Mr. Dinowitz, and so let's get started. The first question is very simple. Talk about your experience, your understanding of the needs of the 81st Assembly District, and why you think you are the best candidate for the 81st Assembly District.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for having this debate. You've been doing this, I think, probably for as long as I've been in the Assembly, so congratulations to you. I've worked in the community my entire life. I started getting involved with tenant organizing, with environmental issues, even before I could vote. This is my neighborhood. This is where I live. This is where I've chosen to raise my family. When other people were leaving the Bronx, we chose to stay here, and I don't regret that for a second. The people who left, they missed out on a lot, but this is our home. And so I fight every day to make sure that our community is the best possible community, is a strong community, that people who need help get help. That's what my district office does. We help hundreds, thousands of people each year, particularly during the pandemic, where we help thousands and thousands of people with every problem, from unemployment to needs, food needs to PPE needs. the list goes on. This is what we've done, but I've also been an organizer in the community. I've worked with community organizations. I've shown up in every corner of the community. And even though our district is diverse economically, ethnically, you name it, the needs are pretty much the same throughout the district. People want safe streets, they want good schools, they want jobs, they want good mass transit, and that's what I have been fighting for all these years, and that's what I will continue to fight for.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dinowitz. Ms. Altagracia Wolford, same question. Your experience, why do you think, presumably you think you're the better candidate?
Sure, thank you. I'm Jessica Altagracia Wolford. I grew up in Kingsbridge, was raised by incredibly brave and resilient women like my grandma, who came from the Dominican Republic in the late 60s and was a home health aide for many, many years right here in this district. She taught me that with faith, with hard work, with compassion, and with care, anything is possible in the Bronx. I've worked for the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, going side by side with union members, bargaining for better contracts, better wages. I've worked for the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs at the height of the public charge crisis under the Trump administration. I've also worked for U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. But the work that I'm most proud of is not the moment where I was able to bring my grandma to the 2016 convention, where she was able to hear Hillary Clinton take that historic nomination in Philadelphia. But it was the mutual aid organizing that I've led here in our community with folks from all walks of life, from different neighborhoods, who banded together and asked, what can we do? How can we help folks? We started a free CSA program in the building I was raised in. And to date, we've distributed over 35,000 pounds of fresh produce. And that all started with one simple question, which is, what do you need and how can we help? And that's the experience that I bring to this, which is fresh ideas, fresh leadership, but also a perspective that really unifies folks who care, who believe as Democrats that we deserve better, we can do better, and we can be better.
Thank you very much. The next question goes for you, Ms. Altagracia Wolford. You'll get the first whack at it, and then the Assemblyman can have his opinion. There have been differing opinions between these candidates over the state budget. On one hand, there were billions of dollars for healthcare, childcare, the environment. On the other hand, the budget process was as opaque as ever. The allocation of billions of dollars was negotiated largely behind closed doors. And there was also a $600 million giveaway for a Buffalo Bills stadium and cutting out undocumented children from universal child care that rankled many. So where do you stand? Did the state do a good job in putting together a budget? Did you approve and did you like what you saw?
Well, I know that my opponent has called it the best budget that he's seen in 28 years. And while there were some really promising, hard-fought victories there that belong to the activists, the organizers who have been organizing for decades in this community for real common sense reforms, we didn't do enough. Leaving out undocumented families from very vital childcare subsidies. You know, I'm a mom. I have a 2.5-year-old. So at the height of the pandemic, while doing this mutual aid organizing, while working for Senator Gillibrand, I personally felt that stress and that pressure of trying to care for my grandparents and also care for my young one. And so I think that it's really important that our lawmakers understand just how hard things were before the pandemic. Over half of renters here in the district are struggling to pay their rent. Their rent burden. About a third of us are extremely rent burdened. I personally saw my rent go up this year. And so I want to make sure that, you know, in these budget negotiations, I was very optimistic when I heard Governor Hochul mention the importance of language access and language equity in her State of the State address a few months ago, but we haven't done enough to really deliver on multilingual constituent services.
30
which
seconds.
I know is a huge need for folks, including for the Bangladeshi community, which is one of the fastest growing communities right here in the 81st District. And so I believe that in order to be able to access these vital resources, you want to make sure that we're able to speak the languages that New Yorkers speak, that our offices look like New Yorkers that we're serving, and that we're really trying to firm the affinity, the dignity and care of folks right here in the Bronx and one of the most vibrant and diverse boroughs. But we need more, and we didn't get enough.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dinowitz, your thoughts?
Sure. Make no mistake about it. This was the best budget in all these years. It's never good enough. We always strive to do even better, but this was definitely the best budget. We put more money into education, more money into healthcare, more money into childcare, and the list goes on and on. We did a very good job this year, but of course there were things that I would have liked to have seen done that weren't done. But the fact is, we have 150 members of the assembly, 63 senators, and 1 governor, and you have to come out with a product that people could agree upon. I was against that stadium in Buffalo, and I spoke forcefully against it. But the fact is that the governor wanted it, the people in Western New York wanted it, and some people get stuff in the budget, like people across the state. So we got things we wanted, they got things they wanted, but none of us got everything that we all wanted. And some people, there were good things in the budget. There were some things I didn't like, and there was
30
some
seconds.
should have been in the budget. But to suggest that this wasn't the best budget is really not consistent with the facts. The funding that we put in for so many important things is unmatched in anything that we have ever done. I'm very proud of it, but I fully recognize that we have
15.
more work to do, and we're going to continue to do that work because we never stop working for the people in our community or for the state of New York.
Thank you very much. Did either want to follow up, I guess, Ms. Altagracia Wolford, or we just move on?
We can move on.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Dinowitz, this has come up and it's been talked about throughout the community and in media. There was frustration at the end of the legislative session this year when the closing of a sexual assault loophole that allows accused rapists to get off if the victim was intoxicated did not pass. Seems like a logical and fair-minded concept. You're the chair of the Assembly Codes Committee. Why didn't it pass?
Because, well, it didn't pass either house of the Senate. Let's be clear on that. It didn't pass the Assembly. It didn't pass the Senate. That's not good enough. I've worked on this bill for a few years now. Unfortunately, not everything gets passed as quickly as we'd like it to. We have to build coalitions both in the Assembly and in the Senate to get this done. I've met with numerous advocates, with district attorneys' offices. It's unfortunate that these type of cases, and they're horrible, don't often get prosecuted. That's on the DA's offices, but I don't even want them to have the excuse not to prosecute. I understand they want to make sure their win-loss record is as good as possible, but we want to make sure that victims get justice. Every victim deserves justice. You know, I have fought all these years in this area. I passed the first Anti-Human Trafficking Act, for example, in New York's history. This was not even defined in the law until my bill became law a number of years ago, and it served as a model for the country. I was a co-sponsor in recent years of the Child Victims Act, just this year of the Adult Survivors Act, and the Assembly alone, not the Senate, passed the Rape is Rape bill. So there's more work to do. We've accomplished a lot, but we have more to do, and this is one of them. As I said, everybody deserves justice. The Assembly didn't pass it this year, nor did the Senate. Next year, I'm hoping that we can come together and pass a bill that's the same in both houses that can be signed by the governor.
Ms. Altagracia Wolford?
Could we get a fact check on that? Because did we not pass this bill for the first time in the Senate in 2019, Gary?
I don't know. I mean, you can ask Mr. Dinowitz. He might know more than I do. I don't. Is that what your response is?
Well, I just want to ask that question, right? Because that's not the set of facts that most of us are operating under. But I do want to say, as a survivor who has personally gone through the process of coming forward, it is a total nightmare. The way that the criminal justice system is built to dissuade a number of folks who make the incredibly hard choice of coming forward after something that's extremely challenging. I'm very thankful for the support that I've gotten, the mental health care that I've gotten as a survivor myself. It's the reason why I'm able to advocate for myself and for others here. But I also believe that it's important that our laws really reflect what we know must be the gold standard, which is affirmative consent. Affirmative consent should be the law. New York State has an opportunity to be leaders nationally to close what's not really a lie, not a loophole, it's actually a lie. It is a lie to assume that we are able to allow folks to give consent affirmatively when they're intoxicated. So I think it's essential that we actually push back on some of these lies that we don't have the power to change the laws. I've talked to a number of activists. I've worked in this space for years. Some of my first organizing work was on college campuses, organizing with students who wanted to change the rules at the state level in Massachusetts, across the country, right here in New York, supporting Columbia's university students when they were first really activating around this issue. I'm thankful for all the Title IX protections that are in place, but frankly, our lawmakers have a responsibility to care for survivors, to make sure that the laws reflect what we know is to be true, and that's affirmative consent is the gold standard, and anything less than that isn't good enough.
Thank you very much, Mr. Assemblyman. Did you want to respond to that?
I
I don't know the details of the bill that she suggested. Maybe you know better than I do.
First, this year, the year we're in, neither the Assembly nor the Senate passed the bill. That doesn't mean we can't do it in the future, hopefully as quickly as possible. I am terribly sorry you went through that horrible experience that nobody should go through. It should not happen to anybody. And victims, survivors deserve justice. And that's what we're aiming for. That's why I've been a key player in some of these other bills that I mentioned earlier. The Human Trafficking Act was my legislation. The Adult Survivors Act, the Child Victims Act, rape is rape. But we're not there yet. We're never finished with what we have to do. And this is important for us to do, and we will have to do it. We should do it. And I'm hoping that we'll do it next year.
Thank you. I don't believe that the loophole, that's why there's been this loophole. I don't believe that loophole was closed in any legislation in 2019. That's why the dialogue is still going on. Let's move on then. I guess the next question for you, Ms. Altagracia Wolford. Let's talk about crime and public safety. Recent polls showed that 73% of Bronxites feel less safe since the beginning of the pandemic, and that 81% of Bronxites are very concerned or somewhat concerned about being the victim of a violent crime. There are obviously many angles to this. Among them is the crime-fighting budget, and there's also the state's bail reform law that was revised this spring to direct judges to consider new factors in setting bail. But what is the best way to keep people safe in the 81st Assembly District? I mean, there's, as I said, many angles. What's your point of view?
Well, I've heard from thousands of voters that housing, that public safety are among the biggest issues that they're stressed about, that they're worried about. The lack of permanent affordable housing is a public safety issue. I believe that it's time that Democrats really commit to not bowing to Republican talking points about public safety, but that we take a really comprehensive view to ask about the health of our ecosystems. Are our kids in fully funded schools? Are those schools safe for our kids? Are we making sure that elders are able to age with dignity in their homes, that they have quality home care if that's necessary, that they lived in dignified housing? I know from experience with my grandparents, they live in a 4th-floor walk-up. We're constantly arguing with our landlord over basic repairs that keep them unsafe, right? When the ceiling collapsed on my grandfather a few years ago, that was really terrifying for my family because we had to mobilize, we had to act.
30 seconds.
And there are a lot of families in the district that are worried about basic essential needs. And what I offer as a leader and as our next assembly member is to bring a real comprehensive view to make sure that our elders feel safe. I hear from Black and Brown elders in the community constantly that they want to see cops in the streets. So what I want to make sure is that we're equipping those who are in charge with our public safety to be effective, to be accountable, to be transparent, and to make sure that people are actually getting the responsive care that we need.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dinowitz, your thoughts?
Well, I agree with much of what was just said, but the question deals with public safety. And I've spoken to countless people, not only these past few months during the campaign, but doing my job over the years. And right now, bar none, the number one issue for people is safety in the streets. People are worried. People are worried when they hear about the shootings that are going on and everything else that's been happening. It's not hard to understand why people are concerned. Now, public safety involves more than just the number of police we have on the streets. It involves allocating resources to important programs to prevent crime, whether it's mental health or social service programs. All that's very important. But the fact is, I don't know a single person who has said to me they want fewer police. And it's my understanding from what I just read recently that my opponent had indicated she wants to cut $1 billion from the police budget. Now, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. If you cut $1 billion, even if you shift it over to important other programs, you're going to lose thousands and thousands of police officers. I supported the package of legislation for police reform just a couple of years ago, including the repeal of 50A. We got to have good policing, but we have to have policing.
Thank you very much. Ms. Altagracia-Wolford, your thoughts? Presumably you wanted to respond to that.
I certainly do. Thank you. You know, what I'm assuming the assembly member is referring to is the mailer that is full of dangerous lies that was sent about me, full of smears about me being a dangerous, reckless socialist. This was pure Republican talking points. The fact that Trump donors are deploying these very dangerous tactics against me, a woman of color, a lifelong Bronxite, a mother, trying to make me look like a criminal, accusing me of saying things that I have never once said before is outrageous. And frankly, I hope that the assembly member will disavow those attacks.
Mr. Dinowitz, you can respond to that.
Well, I received the same pieces of mail, including one by your supporters from the Working Families Party that essentially blamed me for the people killed in the Twin Parks fire a few months ago, that horrific fire. That's something which should be disavowed immediately. But the mailer that I'm reading that you're talking about simply says, and I'm looking at it, that it refers to a Daily News article. You did sign a letter with other members of the de Blasio administration calling for $1 billion cut to the police department. And the reason I know that is because I looked up the Daily News article just yesterday because I was curious, and sure enough, there was your name.
Ms. Altagracia-Wolford.
Sure, Gary. I want to make sure that we don't walk away from this point because it's really important. It's very damaging. Frankly, show him the mailer since you have it. It says, I pledge to defund the police. And I've never once said those words. Anyone who could read that letter, 200 members of the de Blasio administration signed on to this, calling for accountability because our former boss did not do enough in the wake of the George Floyd protests to protect Black and brown communities. And so I've never once said those words. Again, this is a dangerous smear. I do not believe that is Assemblymember Dinowitz's fault that unfortunately we've lost 17 members of the Bronx community. But I do believe it's important for good Democrats to hold each other down and make sure that Republicans aren't deploying these dangerous lies in our primaries.
Mr. Dinowitz, you get the final word on this.
You signed a letter calling for $1 billion cut to the police. That would involve firing thousands, maybe over 10,000 police officers. You signed the letter, and it's in black and white. There's no denying it.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. This is for you. This will be our final question of the evening. Mr. Dinowitz, there was a rather large controversy that reached into local politics over a plan to build a $195 million men's shelter on North Broadway. Proposed contract is now on a desk at City Hall, so it remains to be seen exactly what will happen. But what can be learned from the process and the selection of the location? And also, where in the 81st Assembly District can supportive housing and permanent affordable housing be built to help address the city's homelessness, as well as, of course, the rising rents that plague every neighborhood in the city, including those in the 81st Assembly District?
Well, first, let me say that I have done possibly more than any other member of the Assembly when it comes to keeping people in their homes. I was the author, lead sponsor of the eviction moratorium, which kept tens of thousands of people in their homes during the height of the pandemic. I was the author of the Tenant Safe Harbor Act, plus numerous other pieces of housing legislation. The best way to not have a homelessness crisis is to prevent homelessness in the first place. I've supported changes in programs so that we can have more affordability in our housing. I think the current program, which actually just expired, 421A, failed us, did not properly provide affordable housing. We have to replicate programs like Mitchell-Lama. You know, as a person who grew up in a rent-controlled walk-up, in NYCHA public housing, in rent-stabilized housing, and in Mitchell-Lama also, I understand the housing needs that everybody faces, and we have to address that head on. In terms of the question dealing with the proposed
30
home
seconds.
shelter, very poor choice by the city, no community input. They want to give out a contract worth almost $200 million for this program, for this not-for-profit from Brooklyn,
15
I think has a track record that's less than admirable. So we have to really focus on real solutions, not just plopping down a shelter in places where it probably doesn't make sense.
Ms. Altagracia Wolford?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, both of us have seen personally, what the housing crisis looks like. I do believe that the work of activists cannot be erased for a lot of the transformative needs that folks have fought for with the eviction moratorium. I will say the number one thing that we need to address the housing crisis is good cause eviction. Our legislators did not do enough to pass this. It's perhaps because a number of them, including my opponent, take thousands of dollars from real estate developers and from real estate PACs. I think it's essential that we don't continue to elect Democrats who are going to be in the pockets of special interests, including the developers who are the ones responsible for holding back much needed legislation to keep our buildings safe. So with that piece, I think it's also essential that everything is, the North Star for us should always be good cause eviction.
15 seconds.
It should be about making sure that people have what they need here. I do agree that this proposed contract for the North Riverdale shelter was not good enough. I do not want any of these crooked providers who aren't going to deliver the services they say they will to get money from us any longer.
We are really at unfortunately at the time for closing statements, and we'll give each of you 60 seconds.
Do I get a chance on that one?
You want to respond real quick? Then we can make the closing statements 30 seconds.
I didn't realize I spoke on it. Yeah. As I said, I've been the number one pro-tenant person in the legislature, but the issue of my campaign donations has been raised, and in a less than truthful way. Look at who's donated money to my campaign. Of the two of us, I'm the only one who's had significant number of donors from the community. Of the two of us, I'm the only one who's had donations from the people who work in our community, labor unions, the healthcare workers such as 1199, educators such as the UFT, municipal frontline workers.
We're going to go out of time.
These are the workers.
We're going to give Ms. Altagracia Wolford a chance on that. And then we've got to do 30-second closing statements. Go ahead, Ms. Altagracia Wolford, if you wanted to respond.
Anybody could look at our filings. So that sounds great. I don't know why the assembly member would attack our small dollar donors. I'm proud of the friends that I've made across the country working for the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, working with folks to elect Hillary Clinton, working at Media Matters, and working for a number of progressive causes. So I want to thank all of my supporters.
Mr. Dinowitz, then we have to do 30-second closing statements if you want to just wrap up your campaign here.
I will quickly say this. My favorite quote, modernized, is from Robert F. Kennedy. Some people see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not? That's what I've done in the legislature with the Human Trafficking Act, with the leadership in the vaccination movement, with the eviction moratorium. These are things that have never been done before. I've done it. I continue to do it. I get things done because I think big, and I've always been an agent for change. We've made changes time after time, and that's what I do.
Thank you so much, Ms. Altagracia Wolford. You have the final word. 30 seconds, please.
All right, 30 seconds. I just want to thank everybody who's joined us on this journey. Our movement continues to grow because a lot of us know that the status quo isn't working for us. We cannot continue to elect Democrats who are more beholden to special interests and to the status quo and to the systems that harm working families across the Bronx. I want to thank everybody who's joined us. And if you want more information about my platform, please visit justforassembly.com. What I offer to you is openness on all of the biggest challenges that are facing us, and a real unity from Riverdale to Wakefield and all of the communities that I love and care for. And I cannot wait to work for you.
Listen, I'm sorry we ran out of time. We'll remind people to vote on June 28th. If you need more information about voting, it is vote.nyc. Mr. Jeff Dinowitz, thank you. Ms. Altagracia Wolford, thank you. And we'll see you next week on BronxTalk. Good night.